Hello everyone. My name is Ryan Erb. I'm the Executive Director of the United Way Perth-Huron, and we are so thankful that you are joining us tonight for this special forum around basic income. On behalf of our Social Research and Planning Council and others who have volunteered their time and energy, I want to express my thanks to them for setting this up tonight, and also a special thanks to our friends at the Stratford Festival for providing partnership and technical assistance to make it possible. We're really grateful that we can be here tonight to talk about an important subject, raising income for the most vulnerable Canadians, our friends, our neighbors. It's an incredibly important issue. And one of the best ways, I believe, to do this is by implementing policies and programs like basic income. Locally, here in Stratford, Ontario, where I'm speaking to you from, both ourselves and the health unit are publicly endorsing this program. And we believe that we can learn more tonight by bringing you a very prestigious panel of experts. And moderating the panel tonight is Mev Beatty, a critically acclaimed actor, writer, and voiceover artist. Perhaps more importantly, she's a well thought out person and an excellent facilitator. Mev, take it away.
Hello. Welcome everyone in Cyberland to this event. What a pleasure to have you with us. My name is Mev Beatty, and I am indeed a storyteller and a theater maker and an activist, and I'm coming to you today from my third floor in Toronto, which is on a site where people have been telling stories and making change for thousands of years before me, and I'm very grateful to be here, to be able to come to you tonight. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel of extraordinary experts on this very interesting topic. I have been curious about basic income for most of my life. I was raised with parents who were interested in this idea. And then a few years ago, I guess probably actually just about a year ago, I was freshly interested in this subject because I stumbled on an interview with Andrew Yang on the New York Times Daily podcast and heard his thoughts on this subject. And I was immediately compelled freshly by both the economic piece and also the empowerment and the mental health piece of this fascinating topic. And so I happen to believe we live in extraordinary times, and I think that is inarguable today especially. And to live in extraordinary times means we have an extraordinary opportunity to rethink the status quo and for change. And so I am so thrilled to have four such thinkers with us today. I'm going to start off for those who might be just stumbling onto this conversation with us by saying basic income is an unconditional cash transfer from government to individuals to enable everyone to meet their basic needs, participate in society, and live with dignity regardless of employment status. To my understanding, basic income is not welfare, it is not EI, nor is it the CERB or the CRB late relief models that the current government has given us for dealing with pandemic situation. And today I am honored and thrilled to introduce our panel to you. We have Senator Kim Pate with us, a Canadian senator who is a nationally renowned advocate and who is the executive director of the Canadian Association of the Elizabeth Fry Society, a society that supports some of the most marginalized, victimized, criminalized, and institutionalized citizens. In April of this year, Senator Kim Pate and Francis Larkin spearheaded an open letter from 50 senators to the Prime Minister on a nationwide guaranteed livable income program. Thank you for being here, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Heichel, I don't know where they are on your screen. The senator's right underneath me. Ron's over there, but it might be different for you out there in Cyberland. Ron Heichel has the answer to basic income. He was the executive director of the original Mincome project in Manitoba in the mid to late 70s, and he's been advocating for universal basic income ever since. He taught political science at Canadian and American universities, was the Deputy Minister of Health in Manitoba, and has worked on more than 30 electoral campaigns across North America, Turtle Island, and Britain. So I imagine he was watching last night. And he currently resides in Stratford, Ontario. Tracy Smith-Carrier, on my screen, she's down there, is an associate professor and the graduate program coordinator in the School of Social Work at King's University College at Western University, and the chair of Basic Income in London, Ontario. And Floyd Marinescu, he's down there for me, is the CEO and co-founder of C4 Media, which provides software development, news, and learning events serving 1.2 million online and 8,000 attendees annually in international QCon conferences. Floyd is also an angel investor in over a dozen startups and has built teams and businesses all over the world. And I won't list them all because there's so many, but a lot of them are places I hope to visit one day. And he is also the CEO of UBI Works and an activist for universal basic income. Welcome to our esteemed panel. I would like to start us off by giving each of you a chance to have some opening remarks and introduce yourselves to the world and tell us why basic income is so important. And perhaps, Floyd, because I ended with you, could I begin with you? Would you start us off?
Certainly. So I have a quick screen share, and I had a couple things to say in this 3 minutes time period. First of all, a bit of an advertisement I think you're all going to want to know about. There is a report coming by the Canadian Centre of Economics Analysis, which I am sponsoring through UBI Works, that will show the economic impact of a basic income. It will be released in mid to late November. And just like we know that basic income will increase graduation rates, reduce crime, improve health outcomes, reduce poverty, we need to understand that another downstream effect is it will grow the economy. That is very important in today's politics, that get established in a credible manner. And the preliminary results, which I've had access to, show that it will do these things. It will create hundreds of thousands of jobs versus an economy with no basic baseline, no basic income, even up to 1 million jobs in some scenarios. It's sustainable in that economic growth lasts long term versus a baseline of no basic income. And this can be achieved through a variety of funding combinations, including high or low use of debt. So this is very important, and please feel free to get in touch or follow UBI Works to know about this when it comes out. Second thing is UBI Works puts forward a proposal called Recovery UBI that includes a guaranteed minimum income of $2,000 a month, but also includes a $500 a month dividend for all adults. And I want to tell you a bit why and show you what it looks like. This is what it looks like. Where at every stage, every decile of income, everyone would get $500 a month, as well as a guaranteed minimum income, the red part of this, that would help those who need it most. Understanding the blues, understanding how to give Canadians a share of our economy to participate in economic growth. It's also a tax rebate for the middle class, which would offset any increase in taxes from the middle class to the highest earners, which would get the middle class more on board with this, since it's easy to weaponize basic income as costing the middle class in order to help those in poverty. And this is a way to avoid that. Our proposal has had 22,000 Canadians sign on from all ridings. And we showed 8 ways to pay for it on our website that span the political ideology in terms of mechanisms, many of which don't involve touching income tax and are based on researched proposals from many tax reform institutions in Canada in the last 10 to 20 years. So this proves that basic income is just a matter of political will. And our proposal is 4 times more expensive than that was tried in the Ontario pilot. So even in that regard, we show that it's possible. And why is it 4 times more expensive? Because the scale of the problem must match the scale of the solution. Advocates for guaranteed minimum income talk about addressing poverty and filling the gaps and reform of our social safety net. These are absolutely the most important priorities. We should do those first. UBI advocates for the dividend model are concerned with, frankly, that jobs aren't working for most people. Wage growth has not outpaced cost of living, and technology is one of the prime factors, and we need to address that. And finding a way to share in the gains, reconnect economic growth to people's incomes at all levels, especially the median, is how we do that. It's a much bigger challenge. And the ultimate problem is polarization of job quality. I'm over my 3 minutes now, so I'll stop. But a good economy is one that moves people up the middle, like it used to be until the mid-70s. What we've been seeing since then, primarily due to technology, is the medium decreasing, while lower pay, lower quality jobs increasing has been validated recently by CIBC, where the share of jobs that are low wage, low quality is increasing. Job growth is concentrated in low paying industries. And all the many economists who've studied automation and technology are saying that's the reason. And there are no trends and no singular policy will address this other than a basic income in the manner that I showed. So I'll stop there. I'm at 4 minutes. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Floyd. Tracy, I'd like to move to you next because a couple of things Floyd said, I saw you nodding your head. And so I felt like there were a few things in content there that made you feel connected to the content. So would you carry on for us?
I'm just going to share my screen as well. I guess it's important, I guess, for me to start with context. We are certainly in the midst of COVID-19, seeing an uncertain housing market, food insecurity on the rise, the retail, hospitality, service sectors seeing record declines, people being laid off or seeing their hours of work curtailed, mental health and health issues, again on the rise, reports of increased violence against women and incidents of abuse against children increasing. And a lot of these losses and costs are being disproportionately borne on disadvantaged groups. So one of the questions I always ask my students is, do we have to live in a society where there is a lot of poverty? Is it inevitable? And what we know is that no, it's not. And there have been countries that have actually virtually eliminated poverty in their midst. We can see here, looking at child poverty rates from 2017, that Denmark essentially eliminated poverty, 2.19%, and Finland 3.5% in child poverty. A lot of those are actually, those kids are immigrants and not people who've been raised in the country, whereas Canada, a rate of 14.2%. Now, thankfully, we've had some good public policy and some changes to provide some increased benefits for families. So that child poverty rate is on the decline. But again, it speaks to the need for public policy changes to address these issues. From the 2008 Canadian Household Panel Survey, just a quick guess. I'm wondering if you can guess how many people households who are experiencing food insecurity actually used a food bank. You might be surprised to guess, Val Tarasic and her colleagues found out that only 21% of households living in hunger and food insecurity actually use a food bank. 80% don't and won't. So having money put into investments, putting into emergency food or charitable aid does not solve the problem. Poverty and food insecurity will not be resolved through these measures. So in terms of what we're looking for, hoping for, some of the principles of basic income, it has to be adequate, having enough money for people to live on, must provide people more choices, so autonomy, dignity. It has to be offered through the tax system, so there's no stigma attached. Equality of opportunity offers opportunities for everybody. Non-conditionality, again, no strings attached to it. This moves away from those welfare models where there's lots of conditions. And universality of access. Anyone who needs it should be able to get it. Why do it? Because it works. And there's a wealth of literature now that can attest to the fact that basic income indeed works. We can talk quite a bit about the Minkum experiment, and perhaps I'll leave that for my colleague Ron to do. But as you can see, a lot of great outcomes. And not only from the Minkum experiment. Basic income has been piloted across pilots and experiments across the world now, and it has a wealth of literature. And this screen I know is busy, but it goes to show that cash transfer programs have been tried in places like Brazil, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mexico, Finland, Kenya, all over the place. And there's a lot of literature to support this is an evidence-informed approach to dealing with poverty and food insecurity. So in terms of kind of trying to getting to the cost argument, maybe before we get there, just taking a look at this slide, we can see that in terms of developed OECD countries, this is our spending, social expenditures as a percentage of our GDP. We're on the bottom end. So this is 2017. We pay less in social expenditures than the United States does to take care of our citizens. We have miles to go in terms of providing better for folks. And in terms of strategies, I've indicated a few on the right here in terms of we have no wealth taxes, we have no gift taxes or estate taxes. Almost every other G7 country has those kinds of taxes. We could certainly start with some of those taxes as a way to support this program. So I will leave that there because I'm sure I've gone over my 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
I have to tell everybody not to worry too much about the 3 minutes because people are dying to know what the full story of this content is. And because, Tracy, because you mentioned Ron and the Manitoba study, Ron, I would love to throw it to you next to give us some of your context, your well-lived and well-earned context.
First of all, Maeve, thank you for the introduction. I don't think I could, with a straight face, claim to have the answer. I think what I probably could claim to have is a part of the answer, and probably being a little humble is an appropriate starting point. I want to talk about why I think basic income is important. The relative importance and the societal benefit of basic income greatly depends upon the specific form of basic income program designed and implemented that you have in mind. Basic income, when normally discussed, is only a general concept. There is no general concept by itself ever solved any social problem or paid anybody a dime. And there are lots of different meanings in circulation about what basic income is. Specifically, I believe, however, basic income could have an enormous impact, positive impact, on society if it is properly designed and administered. Specifically, basic income can reduce the negative psychological effects of prevailing financial insecurity. Those on lower incomes must cope both with the fact that they have less money and with the fact that even the small amount they have fluctuates radically from one pay period to another. The resulting damage of that, both the low income and the fluctuation in it, can be clearly seen if you take a look at the issue of child development, as well as on relationships between spouses. There is a large body of very good data and analysis on both of these issues. You could see, for example, a study called The Negative Effects of Instability on Child Development by Sanborn and Huerta from the very prestigious Urban Institute. To quote from that study, research shows that some fluctuations in income are common. 2 in 5 adults living with children lost a quarter of their income at least once in some point over a common year. Economic instability is most prevalent among low-income families. Specifically, in the lowest income quartile, about 20% of individuals with children lose at least half their income at some point during the course of a year, and only about 50% recover to pre-drop income levels within another year. Low-income families negatively affects children's socioeconomic, cognitive, and academic outcomes. Even after controlling for parental characteristics, the children's cognitive development during early childhood is extremely sensitive to the existence of low income. So in summary form, basic income is able to adjust itself quickly and accurately to extreme fluctuations in the low income of an individual family will be of enormous benefit to the development of physically, cognitively, and emotionally healthier children, and over time can reduce the demand and the cost of both physical and mental health care. Every provincial government in this country is struggling with the problem of the annual increase in the rate of the cost of the healthcare system. I have had the possibly pleasure of helping to put together provincial budgets. And I can tell you for sure that every province in this country is struggling to meet the annual rate of increase in the cost of the healthcare system. One of the very few ways to be able to do that would be to establish a basic income which could moderate the annual rate of increase over time of the cost of the healthcare system. There are, of course, other significant benefits from basic income, but this, I believe, is the most important one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I remember reading about the Manitoba study, and as a newbie to this topic, was blown away at the facts about hospital visits, the facts about how much medical care was reduced in the immediate, in the short term, like within a couple of years, how a basic income could affect how much medical care people seem to require. Senator, I would love you to speak to us about your thoughts about in all the flurry of context that we've just had from different points of view. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to join you from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. My interest in this started probably 25 years ago, maybe more, but certainly I became aware of guaranteed livable income, basic income ideas about that time. And it was really because I was working predominantly on issues related to those who were, as you've already said, who were on the margins, who were poor, who had been victimized, had past trauma, racialized, particularly First Nations, Black and other people of color, as well as those with significant disabling mental health and intellectual disabilities. How was I doing that? Well, I was working with folks who were being criminalized and imprisoned. And in a context where the social, economic, and health safety nets were completely, in my view, eviscerated, if they ever were the types of nets we thought they were, that they certainly were, that we were dining out on internationally as saying they were. And people who fell through them and had no other opportunities were more likely to be criminalized and imprisoned than have the supports they need. And even now, as we're speaking, Indigenous young people are more likely to end up in prison than they are to end up with a university education. So I started working on how do we actually achieve some of what we say we're doing when we talk about having a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. How do we achieve the kind of economic, health, and social equality? And so started working on things like we need a guaranteed livable income, but we don't need it in isolation, not just a money transfer and not a demogrant. So a bit different from than what Floyd was talking about how do we actually provide the resources to people who need it when they need it, with none of the strings attached that Tracy quite appropriately talked about. The fact that we have social assistance schemes in this country that are so judgmental, are also criminally low in terms of the resources they provide, and that every single person on social assistance in this country, if they were monitored, could be criminalized for not being able to survive on what they're doing. And that's not, don't hear me as saying, I think, poor people should be criminalized, not at all. But because they are provided with such inadequate resources, if they were monitored, many are, have clawbacks, are criminalized, are dealt with in absolutely unfair ways because they just can't manage. And so I think we need a mental, dental, pharmacare process as part of our healthcare system. I think we should have, like some of the countries that Tracy talked about, free post-secondary education. And I think we should have the kind of housing strategy the government has, undertaken to provide, and with their human rights spaces. Oh, that's my 3 minutes up. So, basically the only system right now that we seem to have no end of resources to invest in are our criminal and our penal systems, our legal systems. And we never seem to question, I shouldn't say we, writ large, there seems to not be the same questioning. And we could fund this, and the downstream savings in not just the healthcare system, but the criminal legal system, and the fact that so many people who are currently in poverty would be investing the money they get in the community, not in the way that many wealthy people now in the graphs that Floyd showed us send their money offshore and don't actually invest it in our own economy. And whether it's because they're using tax havens or they're investing in other places that don't necessarily benefit Canadians. So that's how I came to be here. And it's actually why I agreed to have my name put forward for the Senate when I was approached by some Indigenous women who wanted to do that. And so that was really the function. And Yet when I first got here, I was told that that would sound like a way out idea. But so in February of this year, I introduced an inquiry in the Senate, and then the pandemic hit the next month, and suddenly we have 50 senators, a whole bunch of members of parliament, and many, many, many others, all of you here who have been working on this for a long time. So I'm really the cheerleader here.
Thank you, Senator. We'll take 3 cheers. Yay. I wanted to, when I talk to people about moderating this panel, or in fact this idea in general, there seem to be a few consistent questions that come back to me. And one of them is really interesting as an actor in a theater world, quite a successful theater performing arts performer who is now can't work because the theaters are closed. And so now there's the CERB and the CRB that my colleagues are all looking into. And even with that, we are getting a question about whether there's a disincentive to work if you are given an automatic amount of money to survive. It's an interesting thought to me, but I'd love to have one of you, let's start with Tracy, if you would speak to that, but I'm going to throw it around to everybody if they have things to add to this. What do I say, the next person that says to me on the street, but people will just stop working? What do I say to them?
It's myth. It's myth. So a study was done in 2018 by Richard Gilbert and his colleagues, looking at 16 basic income trials across the globe. And what he found was that in countries, developing countries, so countries of the global south, that actually work participation increased, or there was no zero impact at all. There was a modest decrease in countries like Canada, in the United States, in those basic income pilots. But I think it's really important to contextualize the reasons why there was a decrease. And largely it had to do with the fact that people wanted to go back to school or wanted to stay in school longer. So there's that piece. And there was also, in the Minkum project, women were only given 4 weeks of maternity leave. And so some of them decided to have their basic income and stay home with their kids for a little bit longer. So if you look at the reasons why people weren't working, you probably say, actually, that's advantageous to society and advantageous to those individuals and households for the future. So having a modest decrease might be a good thing.
Floyd, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I was going to cite the same study that collectively, in that study, 105,000 people have already been in basic income experiments, and they kept working. And in this country, the Canada Child Benefit provides over $1,000 a month to over 400,000 families, and we've seen the economy grow in the last 3 years. We've seen unemployment decrease to historic lows before the pandemic. The difference between, I find it curious that people question if a basic income will discourage work when the clawback model in a guaranteed minimum income is basically the same as how EI works, which is employment insurance. You get to keep part of your money when you go back to work. Who doesn't want a bit more? Who doesn't want to have a better life? So to see it just seems a little ridiculous. I mean, if people don't work for a little while, for the most part, it's because they want to better themselves and prepare for better work than they could have access to before that.
We're living in the minute of the pivot. We're living in the pivot minute. That's hard to say. And it feels like this feeds into this wanting to go back to school or wanting to find other skill sets that might be useful for the economy and also furthering the quality of your own life. I know for a fact, many individuals, friends of mine, to whom that is not an option because going back to school or retraining at this point in life, often young middle age, young parents, aging parents, sandwich generation, caring for elderly and also caring for home. A lot of women, this is just not an option to them that would be otherwise, from my understanding of this program. Senator, would you like to say anything about this disincentive to work?
Sure. I mean, it was interesting. I was when I first heard this, I thought, who's saying this? And I'm looking at folks who, may have trust funds or may know people who have trust funds. And so, if you're putting on other people the fact that you may have way more resources than you need to live, and so you might not be doing the things you don't want to do, well, hello, how is that relevant to people living in poverty? And it really, to me, it screams out of the level of privilege that so many people have, that the presumption that if you had all the money you currently have, you wouldn't want to do anything. Well, that's clearly not how people operate. And so I defer to all the people who have done research. But also, just recently, I was talking to a group of Indigenous women in Manitoba, which, of course, was where the Income Project was. But they had either participated or done a study, I can't remember which, but they logged what it cost to negotiate poverty. And it takes 10 to 12 hours a day just to access all, to meet with your social worker, to go to the food bank, to get your kid to wherever you have to get your kid to, on the bus, all of the things they have to do. And so the notion that poor people don't work, even if they're on social assistance, is absolute nonsense. And I think it's such a stigma that we have to break as well. But I know Ron has more information because he did the Income Project.
Ron, please, yeah.
One of the most fascinating things that Income found was this. There was a relatively small decline in the total number of hours worked found by Income. It applied essentially to secondary wage earners, young people just entering the labor force, and people who were about to retire who used Income as a bridge to their retirement. But the analysis that says people work less is highly incomplete. And here's why it's incomplete. Because you also then need to look at what people did if they took a little more time off and weren't working. What did they then do with that time? And here's the answer to that question. What they did typically was to stay home and take care of a newborn child, to stay home and take care of an aged parent, to complete education, high school, college, university, specialized training course, whatever, or use that time to devote themselves to getting involved in useful projects in their own community. So that far from using the time simply to play golf and watch television, the predominant response was to use it constructively in a way that was of direct benefit, not only to themselves, because it then strengthened their ability to find employment that would pay more, but they also used it to benefit those around them and those in their community. And all of those, obviously, are advantages to society.
I appreciate this, how the individual supports the community. That's sort of where I wanted to lead us next, which is in what ways can you help us understand how basic income support supports individuals and therefore supports community and the economy, in fact. And perhaps, Ron, hi, welcome back, Floyd. Perhaps, Ron, we could start with you since we finished with you, and just to broaden that idea a little bit about individuals versus community and the economy at large.
Sure. Well, as I said, first of all, the time that was the added leisure time was used in ways that were of a wide variety of different approaches, socially beneficial, both to the individual concerned or to their family or to their community. And when I was running Income, I was also responsible, interestingly enough, for the provincial welfare program. So I had Income over here and welfare over here. So I had an up close and personal view of the difference in the impact of the two programs. And it was quite clear from that perspective that while people who were on Income felt an obligation to use the time they were acquiring with the leisure time in a way that was constructive, I could see no such impulse among the people who were receiving income from welfare. Now, why that is, I wish I had a body of research to point to, but I can tell you for sure that the psychological impact of receiving welfare as opposed to receiving basic income, which was concerned with only one thing, not who you were living with, whether you were working or not, but only one issue. Did you have enough money by family size to meet the basic cost of biological survival? That was all we cared about. And if you didn't have enough money to meet the basic cost of biological survival, we were going to provide some to you. And that was the only concern we had. And that difference between that and the much more intrusive approach taken by welfare had the consequence of enabling people to make an investment productively and over a significant length of time in their own capacity and in that of those around them.
Thank you for that. It's so, I'm a theater nerd, so just hearing the word welfare in that context, in the irony of feeling the stigma of that those two syllables. Yeah. Thank you, Ron. And Tracy, could you speak a little bit to the community or the social or the micro to macro scale of it?
Sure. I'm going to start at the community level, if that's okay.
Please.
An article by Kalnitsky in 2016, he examined Dauphin, Manitoba, the saturation site for the Income Project, and found that actually there was an increase in wages offered by the businesses in Dauphin.
Yes.
And that people were less likely to experience debt problems. And that, going to Ron's earlier point, that there was less likelihood that people would assign moralistic judgments on people accessing basic income. So it's kind of similar to even what I'm hearing now, where there's not the same sort of judgments on people who are accessing the CERB and the Canada Recovery Benefit, that the basic income could act similar in that we would not be like, again, we wouldn't know who's getting it and who's not. And so therefore there's no stigma, there's no conditions to it. So I think, again, this really speaks to a model that really assures dignity for people, which I think, financial destitution is one part of the mere material deprivation is one part of living in poverty, but the shame that people experience is the other huge part of that, right? And that speaks to all the mental health issues that people experience. So I think that those community benefits are huge. And again, income is the single most, the greatest determinant of health. So we can, by increasing people's income, affect their health and mental health outcomes for the rest of their life. So this is something that, and you already spoke to the fact that within 3 years of a project, they were able to reduce their health expenditures by almost 10%, 8.5% in 3 years. Massive savings to the healthcare system.
Right. So project that savings across the entire country, and you're talking about a massive amount of money, which should then be taken into consideration when you want to figure out how much a basic income program is going to cost you, because it's also going to save you a substantial amount of money.
There's a lot of our listeners that love that. Floyd, over to you.
The impact on wages is really important. One of the most popular social media posts we've ever made was a statement that basic income makes people unexploitable, at least financially. Because imagine the impact in society if people could hold out for better pay or better work. Imagine employers having to compete with each other to offer better pay and better work. It's not fair that only people at median wages and above can actually have easy transition to more jobs that pay well. We fret a lot about how do we regulate companies to pay more, but what if people individually had the freedom to say no? And what impact would that have? Basic income is fundamentally about individual freedoms and empowering the individual to make better choices for themselves.
I'll give you an instance of that. 3 years ago, a Dutch film company for an educational channel in the Netherlands got in touch with me, said they wanted to come and interview me, and then go up to Dauphin to interview people who had participated in the program. They went up there, they did some interviews, came back and told me what they had found. And what they found were that 40 years later, after Mincome was gone, there were people in that community still attributing to Mincome the pivotal developments of their life that enabled them to complete an education, to take care of family members, and to make an investment in their own lives, so that 40 years later, they were enjoying a decent, productive, successful life that they attributed 40 years later to the existence of Mincome for 3 short years back in the 1970s.
Incredible. Okay, because of time, I want to push, because I know people are curious. How do we implement this, and can we afford it? So I would like to start with Ron. Can you speak to us there? Or should I flag to you later? And I would like to hear from the Senator and Ron and Floyd about this before we move to the next point.
Well, I have a couple of suggestions.
Because I know also, as the moderator, I should say,
of course,
it seems that there are a few different ways that we can do this, and probably a few different ideas even among this panel. And I think that's fantastic, because the most important thing is that we believe that it's possible, and the fact that anything could be done in a few different ways makes it all the more possible. So go ahead, Ron.
One of the things that needs to be borne in mind is that there are, exactly as you said, Maeve, different ways to design the actual operating program itself. Now, one of them includes specific steps, I won't go into the details, but they exist, that could be put into a program to intensify work incentive, so that far from creating disincentives, you are in fact creating the best of all possible work incentives to strengthen people's commitment to being in the labor force and to making investments in themselves to increase their capacity to find better paid employment. And of course, if they find better paid employment over time, they will be less reliant upon public programs, but they'll be also earning more money and therefore paying more taxes. So they are in fact in a position eventually to make a more significant contribution to the public welfare, and that is, it seems to me, of enormous importance.
Senator, what are your thoughts on how we can implement and move forward with this big idea?
Well, I think the government already did some of that during the pandemic. We saw the desire to roll out money very quickly using the CRA system. And, the fact that we're talking about, companies such as H&R Block and others that make money off of doing other people's, particularly poor people's, tax returns, have fought against the idea of an automatic system where people's, that on a monthly basis, employers could be paying their taxes, and employees and people who don't have income could be accessing government resources, is possible. CERB showed us that. And so has the old age top-up, so has the child benefit. And so we have opportunities to do that. And I think there are three main ways we can do it. And the big issue is the political will, as others have said. And so, we know that there's an interest in EI reform, but EI reform, unemployment insurance, is just that. It's employment insurance. And we may want to tack on some training issues, but we can't pretend that it will substitute for social assistance. We definitely need social assistance reform. We've already as Tracy especially has talked about that, and I talked a bit about it, and so did Ron. But we could do it as an anti-poverty strategy, and it would cost way less than our social assistance schemes now and deliver more resources to people. And I also think we have to do it through tax reform, so that we do have to look at redistribution of wealth in a way that we don't really look at in this country yet, and that we should be doing it so that we will be investing. The cost right now that the Parliamentary Budget Office said it would cost to roll out the Ontario model across Canada would be about $40 billion. That did not take into account the social assistance schemes and getting rid of those and the reallocation of those. And it didn't take into account the downstream savings that we would have in terms of healthcare costs and criminal legal costs. Minimal, as well as maybe tax reform savings. So I think it's infinitely doable. And if I go back to, again, the questions we never pose about what it costs in terms of offshore tax havens, what it costs us in terms of lost economic opportunity when we jail people, and in particular what it's costing us in terms of, as I'm sitting here, 44% of the women in federal custody are Indigenous, 10% are Black. Like, what's that costing us in terms of generations to come? Nelson Mandela realized when he was the president of South Africa that he actually freed all of the women who had children under the age of 12 Now, that's not one of these reforms, but if we look at how we could do some multiplier effects, and he did that because he recognized to jail a mother was to subjugate generations to come. Think of what that would save us. And when we're talking anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 a year to keep those individuals in prison. So I think there's all kinds of ways we can cost it. Really, it starts with, though, the political will to do something very different and to invest in people, not property, not and I think we have to look at how do we consider recovery in this moment. And if we just focus on GDP, we'll totally have missed the boat. And I think that's also part of why so many of your profession have signed on to the whole idea of a guaranteed livable or basic income, because of a recognition of what's happened to folks during this period. And I do think we have to keep the pressure on some of the labor reforms that have happened, as we recognized how much we rely on service providers, but how much we have undervalued them in terms of the lack of pay, lack of benefits. The number of people, and my mom was died in a senior's home during this period. And, most of the people the personal support workers were working 2 and 3 jobs. They got a $4 an hour top up for a short period of time. That's criminal to me. We should be looking at, the multi-billion-dollar businesses that are, that benefited from wage subsidies, and I would question whether they actually needed them more than I would question whether the people who are economically disadvantaged needed the money.
Thank you, Senator. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for the loss of your mother.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so many stories of loss over this time, so many kinds of grief for individuals and for ways of life and also lines of work. It's a bizarre time. But as we say, these extraordinary circumstances of time mean this extraordinary big-sized thinking, at least to my understanding, so that these are badly wrapped, horribly wrapped gifts of opportunity. Floyd, I know that as you started us off, you've got a big report, big idea, big pitch on this coming down later this month that we're all excited to read in more detail. But can you speak a little bit to your imaginations of how to implement, to forward and push it forward?
Yeah, imaginations is a good word, because that's what we're all trying to do here, imagine a better future. But an interesting finding from that report, because we've been in touch with the economists, is that in many scenarios it will grow the economy, and that economic growth gets rolled into increased tax revenues, which can go to offset the cost of the program, even in uses of heavy debt initially, because it'll examine multiple scenarios. You see the debt to GDP ratio increase temporarily, and then decrease long-term as the economic growth that the program drives catches up. And we often justify big infrastructure projects with a 20, 30-year horizon. This is no different. This is a social infrastructure, economic infrastructure projects to end poverty, grow the economy, stimulate more innovation that will in the long term pay for itself and result in greater economic growth in a sustainable manner. Senator Pate mentioned in an article recently that $44 billion could be paid for with a 5% GST increase. I think that's a great idea. I mean, if we want to make the economy work for people, what more direct way could that be achieved than literally making economic transactions give people a bit of money? And in our 8 ways to pay for the substantially more expensive recovery BI idea, we show literally 8 ways that are completely different, that address a number of different tax reforms, many of which don't touch income tax. And there's just a lot of creative ideas there I'd encourage people to take a look at.
I like this reminder about timelines, because it's such a strange time. I mean, come on, it's pandemic time. Nobody knows what day it is. Nobody knows when people are still suffering from, is it Tuesday? And I think the long-term, thinking about what does this mean for we've talked about children, we've talked about future generations, and we've talked about the long game and the idea of putting big ideas in for a long game, which is always, of course, to my lay person's understanding, challenging in a political system that is always in flux. I wanted to ask one more quick question or closing comments. If your closing comments speak to this question, but someone sent it to us earlier. Someone sent us the question, should we consider taxing the wealthy? I think that we've covered that question a little bit, and also I'm sure there'll be some ideas in Floyd's package about that. But someone also wrote, when considering a reasonable basic income for the general population, how will we take into consideration people living with disabilities who face additional expenses required to maintain their independence and health living in the community? These additional expenses are often not covered by insurance or provincial health service. I've passed this question on just because one of the things people say to me is, oh, is it a disincentive to work? And another thing that people say to me about this subject is, we're worried about what this will do to social programs for the people for whom this basic income will not be enough, and the fear that it will replace other social programs and that it will simply not be enough for those of us who can't survive on, I can't remember what you said, a biological survival rate. But I will also turn to you for closing comments in the interest of time. So if that folds into your thinking as you have your final say with us, that would be great. Ron's got his hand up. I'm going to you first, Ron.
The introduction of a basic income program in Canada would be a naturally occurring opportunity to examine the entire structure of income supplementation programs at the municipal, provincial, and federal level, which would be a good thing because anybody that's dealt with that mare's nest of programs knows that there are some conflicting elements that need to be straightened out. So it would be an opportunity to rationalize the entire landscape of income supplementation. It would also be an opportunity to recognize that there are certain aspects of those programs that cannot be replaced and should not be replaced by basic income. For example, in running the welfare system in both Manitoba and Saskatchewan, I knew that there was an element to welfare called special needs, which was there to look at the highly individualized, unpredictable needs for certain expenditures that needed to be provided as an open-ended element to any overall decent income supplementation program. And that is something that should be effectively continued. At the same time, you could also engage in the rationalization of the interaction of these various programs so that the rules were more coherent, they were easier to relate to, and ultimately you could, by consolidation of various kinds, save some significant amount of money on the administrative cost of implementing all these programs. It's estimated that welfare, for example, costs about 10% of the amount of money that you're giving to people for the administration. It is my view that you could, in fact, reduce that cost from 10% of hundreds of millions of dollars to 1 or 2 or 3% by using a more efficient, coherent, and rationally designed overall structure for implementation and income supplementation.
Thank you, Ron. Tracy, will you speak to us next?
Sure. I wanted to speak about a study that was conducted by Munger in the United States, found that there was $500 billion that was spent on 50 different poverty programs to deal with the symptoms of poverty. At that time, $500 billion would have been enough, if they gave it directly to the people, would have been enough to bring every single American above the poverty line. So I think it's a matter of using the money that we have, and there's a lot of it, to go directly to people and not to systems that monitor people. And the system, like I said, that we have now is a very expensive system that we've opted for. And it actually creates poverty and health and social problems that accompany that poverty. So really it's about not just talking about the cost of basic income, but the cost of the system that we opted for now, which is expensive and ineffective. So we need to move to a system that not only tackles with the symptoms of income insecurity, but tackles its root causes too.
Thank you, Tracy. Senator, will you speak to us next?
Sure, that's great. Thank you. I agree with what Tracy and Ron have said. And next year will be the 50th anniversary of the Kroll Report. Now, most people are going, what the heck is the Kroll Report? Well, the Kroll Report was the first time that I'm aware of that the Senate recommended, the Senate of Canada, Senator Kroll in particular headed the committee, recommended a guaranteed or a basic income as a way to address exactly the issues that Ron and Tracy have, and Floyd have talked about in in terms of the economic, the poverty and addressing poverty. And so I think it's long time past that we actually implement something and take on action. To answer your question about other programs, though, I agree. I don't think just an income support program is sufficient. I think if we really want to increase the standard of living and the quality of life of everybody in this country, and in particular when we're looking at folks who are economically, racially, gender marginalized because of their gender, we need to actually look at providing those other supports. And so I just want to circle back to what I started with, which is I think we actually need to look at housing strategies and labor reforms and tax reforms, but also we need to provide universally accessible, universally available healthcare that includes mental health, dental health, and pharmacare, as well as childcare, and not just the subsidized models like we have in Quebec, where still it's the most privileged that get access to those childcare spots, not necessarily all people who need it, and that we need to also ensure that we're providing free education, because we know that the most educated countries and communities are also the ones where people actually take time, have time, and spend time caring about other people. And I think one thing that we've seen during this pandemic that's made many of us incredibly happy, hopeful, is this whole notion of caremongering and people reaching out to try and care for each other. Even with that, we've seen a huge number of people still falling through the crevices of our systems. And so really it's time to shore those up. And I think the kind of myth busting that Tracy does all the time and others do about, who are the poor? And, I often will say to folks, if you as a middle class person or a person who's wealthier were treated the way we treat poor people, every debt you have would be counted as income. And people stop and think about it. But really, if we were taxed on our debts, if when we paid back our debts, we didn't get any credit for it, the money was clawed back, but we didn't get, the kinds of disincentives that Ron talked about to work. If we did that to people who aren't on social assistance, who aren't economically marginalized, there would be a hue and cry. Part of the challenge is we still stigmatize, and the individuals who are, it's a challenge for them to even speak up because they're shamed into believing that somehow it's their responsibility. And, I think Hugh Siegel's book, Bootstraps Need Boots, was a really good reminder of that reality. And so I want to thank you for moderating us and for all your work and all of the amazing panel. And as I say, you can count on me to continue to be pushing for this. It's the entire reason I'm in the Senate. And if I don't cark it before I get there, before it happens, I'll come back and haunt people until we get it done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. From cheerleader to specter of a ghost, Floyd, can you say a quick goodbye for us? We'd like to, any closing remarks or thoughts you want to give us in the last minute?
Yeah, Andrew Yang calls me the Yang of the North because I talk a lot about technology. And every economic recovery we've had has left most people worse off. Why? Because jobs aren't working for most people, because wages aren't growing faster than cost of living. People are working harder and longer than past generations and getting less in return. Most Canadians in poverty already have jobs. How is this possible? A key reason is that technology is cheaper than workers. We are in the fourth industrial revolution, and what we're seeing is a shrinking of the middle class and the creation of a fewer higher paying jobs, but a greater share of lower paying jobs. That is a structural change that no one policy can address. 42% of the tasks Canadians do at work right now can be automated with existing technology. And what happens when there's sudden shocks to an economy, like what happened when 4 million manufacturing jobs in the United States and hundreds of thousands in Canada were automated, when China shocked the market by entering global supply chains in the 2000s, all those jobs were lost, and half of those people didn't go back to work. It happened to my father and uncle, who were in Ontario's manufacturing sector. There simply weren't any jobs that valued their skills, and people whose jobs are displaced always end up making lower income jobs in even 5 years after this has been proven. So automation is not only about creating more poverty, it will, but it's also about decreasing the value of work itself for most people. And that's why basic income is urgent. At the most basic level, it'll buy people time to transition in this fourth industrial revolution, to seek out better opportunities for themselves. In the most ambitious plans, it'll also give a raise to all working Canadians, so we can all benefit as our economy continues to automate. As technology moves society forward, we have to make sure no one is left behind. And that's what this is ultimately about long term.
I can't possibly thank this panel enough for invigorating a day, which I think a lot of people started with quite a cloud of confusion. I deeply, deeply thank the four of you, and I encourage everyone who has questions that remain unanswered to check the link that will be posted immediately after my face disappears. And let's have this be the beginning or continuation of a long-term conversation, because I think it's a very invigorating and inspiring topic. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Please, everyone, take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.